Hey, welcome to the shop, everybody. This is Gordon, and for this little clip, we are going to do something different. We've been focused on Stanley hand plane Brazilian rosewood parts, of course, totes and knobs, but we haven't really done much with knobs, so it's long overdue. And this guy comes to us from our friend MJ at Just Plain Fun, the parts division. Check out his website. I'll put a link to it below. But it is a Brazilian front knob, and it is what you might say damaged. It was held together with some string, and I had that on there for a longest time. And in prep for this, I took it off and lost it. So let's get to it. We need to clean this guy up. Obviously, this has been cracked open for a long time. Lots of dirt. There's some loose stuff going on here. We're going to clean that up. And it just doesn't seem to want to go together. But again, we're going to take care of that. So let's put him back together. Before we do that, I am fortunate enough to have some references with regards to shape and size, which is one of my main goals always, is to maintain original shape, original dimension, and try and maintain those original aesthetics. So one of the things that I'll do, of course, is try and find a part that we have in stock that on one of my planes or somebody else's that matches, and we've got the height right. And so let's just a quick check on diameter, and to try and use that as a pattern. And this guy, I can't measure across this way because it's not dimensionally correct. So we're just going to turn him up, and he's already a little smaller than this one. I have a low knob here, but that's beaded. It's going to be a little bit different shape. We're going to ignore that guy for a second. And we have, how about a 5.5? So if we drop a 5.5 down here, I'm going to pull this off and see what we have. That looks nice. This looks really good. When I do the comparison, of course, this too could be a good reference for us. So let's check him height-wise. I like it. His diameter. Get back in frame there for you. And again, I'm not really concerned about the number at the moment. So this one's a little bit smaller. Okay, so it's a few thousandths under on diameter. So I'm not too concerned about it at this point. Let's do the best we can to put it back together. And if you're looking and paying attention to what's sitting on the bench, just a quick public service announcement here. As you know, I love everybody that's in this trade, and I'm sharing my knowledge and sharing my experience with the hopes that you too can do what I do, practice, and do the best you can, workers, or if you're putting together a working plane, or if you're putting together something for a collection, or you're trying to restore something that's been in the family for a long time that has a lot of sentimental value and it really means a lot to you, and you want it to, kind of come back to the shape that it once was. There's a lot of ways to go about this. So that's my goal, is to try and put different videos out there, and I love hearing your experience. I love seeing your work, and I'm going to show you this. Obviously is plywood that somebody has done. We're going to give it, if I had to grade that, I'm going to have to give it a D. It's a D minus maybe, but they did it, right? So if you haven't done one, if you haven't put together a hand plane tote from scratch, this person's got one up on you. So kudos to whoever did this. I hope perhaps you're watching, or you might encounter this. I'm never going to trash somebody's work and tell you that that's not good enough, because clearly it put this, what do we got, a 5.5, put this 5.5 back into service, and it's sitting here in the queue, and we're going to put some new furniture on it. But I got to love the work that was done and the effort. I mean, it's even got a finish on it. So do with what you have, do the best that you possibly can, and you're a better person for it. So here we go. Let's get started with this guy. We've got to clean that face up, and the original brass is still in here, and it's really embedded. So we're going to take that out carefully, and then we're going to clean this face up and giddy up. Here we go. Okay, so the brass is out, and what we have is kind of like two halves of an avocado. I want to take some of the material out of the center because I want tight joints, right? We really need this to be closed up, and we want it to be as tight as possible. So the foot looks really good, and if we put this under pressure, I think that we can make that all but disappear. And of course, any split like this is going to be with the grain, so that's also towards our advantage, because if we needed to graft, or if we did something with a colored epoxy, you know, that dark stripe or brown stripe in here isn't going to look too bad because there's vertical stripes already going on, right? So when we're dealing with totes and we're trying to run across on a crack, and it's just a straight line and a nice flowy landscape of grain, it stands out. This one, it's not going to be so bad. So here's what we want. We want to keep as much of the patina in the outside dimension as we can. So we're looking for this crack to have a really tight face-to-face mating line all the way down. Half of it looks great. The problem is when we turn this around, right, it's open. And we can't have that. At least I'm not going to have that. So I just don't want to fill this with, a dark epoxy or make an obvious repair. It's just too big. So how do we do that? If you open this guy up a little bit, some of the material that's keeping us apart is right here, right? So we're going to clean this up kind of, again, like taking the seed out of an avocado. I'm going to remove just ever so slightly some of the material in here that's holding us apart, and like a sprung door, we're going to try and close this thing back up. Inside, no one's going to see this, and we have modern epoxies and adhesives that we can get a great bond. And frankly, we want to clean some of this dirt and this other stuff out of here anyway that's going to potentially cause us a problem. So I'm going to go ahead with some carving tools, and we're just going to kind of clean up this grain. We're going to not encroach on this outside perimeter. We're going to leave that alone. I want a nice margin around there so that when we put this under pressure and we squeeze it back together, we want to close that up as best we can. Okay, that's our goal. So here we go. Now I'm just using a V-carve, right? It's a little scorp, it's easy to use. You could just about use anything here if you didn't have carving tools, right? So here again is another little V-carve. I can push in, make some little cuts. Razor blade, wire brush maybe. But again, I'm paying a lot of attention to this margin out here along the edge. I don't want to violate anything out here, right? If I vein this or I cut or remove material and pop through, that's just going to be squeezed out and it's going to be a little dimple. We're just trying to hide that. So, I suppose with the razor blade, the sharp edge of a razor blade, you could make a little scraper. But I'm doing two things. I'm lowering the surface a little bit. Again, for a graphic, think avocado, right? Or pitting a peach maybe. We're just going to take this out. And I'm opening up that material, removing some of the dirt, which is going to improve our bond. We want to make sure that we get a really good bite. And I want the adhesive to move into the pores of the wood. And if it's full of dust and debris and years of whatever else, that's kind of an issue. So we're kind of leaving a little margin around the outside. You can kind of see what I'm doing there, right? Excellent. Now we're not getting aggressive. I'm not going to just carve this whole thing all out. And I do want to open up some of the grain over here. You get the idea. If we do this right, it's never going to open up again, so we don't have to worry about anybody seeing our handiwork, right? So there we go. Now, we did have a really nice joint over here, so I don't want to get too aggressive over there. The other thing that I like is this little curve in the road right here. That helps us with the registration, make sure that we kind of get that lock. And, you know, in nature, there's very few things that are straight, perfectly straight line, usually stands out. So I love having the little lightning bolt right in there that kind of helps us disguise it. So that'll help hide it. Okay, so open this guy up and you can see the margin that I've left around here. Now, don't get too close to the edge, right? Because like a spoon, if we took everything out and went right out to the fine edge, when we put this thing together and put him under pressure, right, we're going to squeeze it, you run the risk of, you know, blowing that right out. So I am leaving what looks to be about 1/8 of an inch margin all the way around. So that's the goal. I like the joint. It's not as tight as I would really want it to be. And I think once we put this together, we're going to go with a brown epoxy for this one. It's got a nice chocolate color, so I like the brown. I don't see any real black streaks. I might, you know, consider black, but let's do a brown, see if we can make it disappear. So I like this side better than the other. This one's been rounded off a little bit. So where it's been open, you know, it's been split for a long time, and we do look like we're missing a little bit of material down here at the foot. You know, if we really close this up, the bottom looks tight, but we've got this gap right here. You know, so we're going to have to do something with that. So our goal is to, you know, come as close as we possibly can to make it look original again. We're not going to fool anybody. We're not trying to pass it off as new. But, you know, if you're going to do the job, let's do the best we possibly can. So what are we going to do if we epoxy this and we have a river of brown epoxy along here? Once it's sanded, depending on the type of finish, that epoxy is going to take finish different than the virgin rosewood or the real wood. So that's always my concern, is we don't want a big wide stripe of epoxy or, you know, some other substance in there that's going to stand out. The goal is, of course, is to get that as tight as possible. So what we will do, and this will be after the fact, once it's all secure and we get this together and we give it a day, if we have to, I'll go back in with a V-carve and we'll cut a V all the way along in here. And I can do that shallow because I know the center of this thing is solid and it's bonded. And then I will take rosewood, right, like a rosewood donor from another Stanley hand plane. That way we can say it's all Stanley. And I'll just cut a V stripe and we'll plant that right in the V-carve that we cut on the knob. Again, I like the long grain. I'm trying to match this and stay with it. So, you know, again, we've got some other samples. We can maybe get something that's a little more pliable or a little more flexible. It's not necessarily a Stanley tote, but we can get a curl here that's going to be a little bit of a V, and that'll allow us to embed that in. I call it grafting. We'll graft some rosewood in there and then sand it off, and it'll disappear. So why that disappears is because you've got the actual wood on the surface and not the high gloss that would appear from an epoxy river that's going down the center of this thing. So let's put some glue to it. What am I going to do? I'm just going to use, for this one, I'm going to use a standard mix 5-minute epoxy. That's plenty enough time. And we're going to use just a brown resin dye, Hobby Lobby, right? Mix it however you want. We can go, I'm going to go kind of light because there's actually a chocolatey, you know, almost like a light milk chocolate color on the side of this. I don't want to go too dark. I don't want to be black, of course, because I think that'll just stand out. So here we go. Let's glue it up. Before we actually put resin on it, we should put the squeeze to it, right? And that way, kind of like a dry fit up, you'll get an idea of what this is going to look like under pressure. And I'm setting that. I don't want it to shift. I want it to be super flat. I'm going to use 2 clamps so we can get the body, of course, and then we're going to get the foot. And that would be our goal. Like I said, I think one side's going to be a little bit better than the other, and I'm okay with that. I'd rather deal with grafting and trying to hide the seam than to take too much material out of the center of this thing and then either blow it apart or just, you know, jeopardize the integrity of the knob itself. So let's mix up some epoxy. So 2-part epoxy. Put the color on the side. Don't throw a dot of this stuff because it is so, it's concentrated, right? It's going to make such a difference. So just a dot, and you can see what an impact that had. Boom. Probably, man, it's not too much, but it's definitely changed the color, right? So don't go dropping huge amounts. Let's see if we can get just a little more brown than that. So it's a 5-minute epoxy. That's awesome. I still leave it overnight. And a little variation's okay, right? Nothing wrong with that. Let's get artistic. Put some dark up here. We're trying to disguise this as best we can, so let's see what that looks like. Okay, buddy, here we go. Some dark in here. And again, I'm staying away from the margin. If we have a lot of squeeze out and I've got epoxy to deal with and it gets on the outside of the knob in places I don't want it, right? That's never good. We want it to get all the way out there. It's gonna, but I've got some room. Squeeze out in the center, no problem. Nobody's gonna see it. So this little bamboo stick I'm using is right out of the grocery store. It's a skewer, and they're great for barbecue. You probably don't want to use it for barbecue after you've done this. Common sense, right? I'm kidding. I definitely would use this on the barbecue once the epoxy's hardened. For company. Okay. I like this. It's wet. We got a nice coverage. Let's set him here. Now, I don't need more epoxy, but I want to wet this, right? So I want to make sure that I get into some of these little grooves and we get a good tack. So I'm just using the point on my little skewer. Because once we put this together, it is not coming apart. Okay, I like that. I want to make sure we get that foot. Why did the feet crack on all these totes? Well, it's just leverage. If you know the history of Stanley hand planes, the knob, like the one that we're working on, has a flat bottom and there's no bead. That bead is decorative, but the geometry is very specific on this one because it's meant to go on some of the earlier hand planes that did not have a ring around the base of the tote. And that ring was Stanley's attempt to address the feet that were cracking, right? Because leverage, you're going to be, pushing forward. Use this guy. You've got that mounted on the plane, you're pushing forward, and depending on how this is lined up, right? If you're going across grain, now you've got this little wafer, this little sliver on the front, and you're putting a lot of force on it, and there's pressure down here, and so that's going to pop that foot. And so you see things like this, right? Beautiful knob, it's great intact, but it's blown apart on the base, and that's what was going on. So this guy and this one as well are not designed for a plane that has a ring. So if you see this guy that's beaded, I know he's off in the distance, and I shouldn't get off track here while we got epoxy going, but no ring, and then something like this. This was their attempt to fix that. So there's a ring in the base, and this actual knob has a taper to it, and it fits down in that ring. So problem solved. Okay. Well, maybe not solved, but it sure helped. Okay, brown epoxy, face to face. There's a little bit of slimy going on there. A little bit of movement. So let's just put this guy right on the bench. I'm using sandpaper to provide a little bit of traction. I'm not sanding anything, but it's certainly gonna stay put. Am I supposed to say this part of the video brought to you by Bessie? Let's see what we got. I like the feel. I see just a tiny amount of squeeze coming out, which is good. The most important thing is that we stay flat on the bottom. So we got a good bite there. A little bit of squeeze out on the bottom. I'm gonna avoid my little puddle of epoxy. And let's put another clamp on this guy too. We're gonna make sure he stays put for the night, and we're gonna check up on him tomorrow. Okay, I like it. It looks pretty good. We can kind of zoom in there. You can see that we do have a nice line. There's just a tiny amount of squeeze out. Again, we're trying to keep that to a minimum. Not worried about the bottom. We can touch that off and make it flat. But this one's good for now. I just want to leave him for the night. Got a nice brown epoxy in it, and we'll take a look at it tomorrow. Okay, so it's been a day. And again, it's a 5-minute epoxy, but who's in a hurry, right? Give it a day to cure. One of the things I like, I don't know if you can see that, is knowing that we've got our sample there. It's kind of a coffee color. It's got a nice kind of translucent brown to it. It's rock hard, so we know that our part's cured. The one thing that I did do off camera while we set up the clamps, let's see if you can still see that, is because the epoxy was wet and we had a notable groove right in the foot, I went ahead and picked up one of the shavings where I was demoing my little V-groove and buried it in there. So again, we're not using mix and sawdust, but we've got a true rosewood graft right in that wet epoxy. So what are we going to do with this now? Well, you're probably tempted to throw it on a lathe or a drill press and spin it and sand this thing out. And I don't want to do that because, again, we're going to mess with the parts of the knob that are still in great shape or have a little bit of patina on them. So I want to go ahead and just use a sharp knife or razor blade, and we're going to peel this off and try and get that down as smooth as we can without any abrasion. No need sand in the bottom. I know you're tempted to probably put sandpaper on your bench and just scrub this thing back and forth, but again, if we can just use a blade and remove our epoxy and keep that original, you see the spur marks from the factory drive on the lathe. You know, let's not mess those up. We'll just leave them. Now your tendency would want to be to sand on those seams where the adhesive is, but remember we closed this, so we're a little narrow actually from side to side on the good sides. It'll wiggle toward my joint, but side to side we're a little tight. So I'm just kind of open that up just a little bit. We're just going really slow. Take your time. Okay, so I like where we are. I think we're all tuned up and ready to go. And we've still got this rope scar around the base of it. And rather than just put wax on this and call it good, I have decided that we're going to go ahead and touch it off with some 320, maybe a little bit finer. Let's see what we can do to try and even it up a little bit, just to get rid of the stripe. Because I think that just kind of screams, hey, I've been split in half and banded. So let's see if we can make that go away. Other than that, I like where we are. So at this point, you know, for sanding, you could do this by hand and you can go with the grain, which would take some time. And that, you know, no, again, we're not in a hurry, so that's no big deal. I've also used painter's tape and dowels, and you probably see me do this too. You know, just make a handle for it and put it in a drill press, or mount it on your bench in a power drill. And that'll also save a little bit of time, but don't get too aggressive with your sanding. As we're making new knobs, of course, I've got some fixtures that fit, and I would just do something like this. Throw them in the lathe and see what we can do. Okay, so a couple coats of paste wax and let those dry in between coats, and I think we're looking really good. There are some little pock marks. You kind of saw me point that out earlier, right there in the light. I like those. I'm just going to leave them. Again, maybe there's a tendency to try and fill those, you know, with a CA or some colored tint or epoxy. I think they'll just stand out like, you know, great big pimples on somebody's face. If you try and put some color in that and match it, let's just leave it. We've got a little bit of a historic look there. I touched this off to even out the finish and make sure that our wax went on nice. And I wanted to get rid of the rope marks that were on the bottom. And I think that's enough. I don't want to sand this thing for two reasons. One, we don't want to take, you know, all the patina off the thing. And then, of course, we don't want to change the shape. It was already a couple thousand smaller than the other ones on the bench. So, you know, at a glance, standalone, as it's on a new plane or something that's been reconditioned, I think this is going to be beautiful. So I'm happy with the finish. I hope that you are too. Again, give the video a like and subscribe, and we'll just keep right on rocking and rolling. We're going to keep doing some more cool stuff. So hang with me. See you guys soon.